Welcome back to School Eagles. My name is Mr. Palmer and I am Alfred-Almond's speech and language pathologist. I'm sure you're aware by now that some things will be a bit different at the start of this school year. One of the big changes we have to deal with right now is wearing masks when we're together. Some of you might have spent some time this summer wearing a mask and others might just now be getting used to it. Either way, we're all wearing them for the time being. This video is for school teachers and faculty, high school students with some understanding of biology, and any parents interested in the subject of breathing and how it affects a child's development as we head back into school. Getting back to masks for a minute, some people might feel sometimes as though it's harder to breathe while wearing a mask, and there could be several reasons for this. Just having a piece of fabric sitting against our faces might put our nervous systems in a higher state of alertness, but a properly functioning mask itself isn't stopping us from being able to breathe. Young children might have a legitimate feeling of being afraid of the dark, but having that feeling doesn't mean a monster's actually under the bed. The air we are breathing when wearing our masks is warmer and more humid than what we're used to most of the time. And I don't know about you, but I get pretty miserable when the air is hot and humid in the summer. Air conditioners are great not only because they cool the air in a room, but because they decrease the humidity as well. The increased humidity of the air we're breathing when wearing a mask has been shown as part of how correctly wearing many types of masks works to stop viruses from spreading through fluid droplets when we exhale. That said, it's important to make sure we're keeping our masks clean and rotating them if possible. Wearing a mask correctly will not decrease oxygen in the bloodstream, but this topic does give us a great opportunity to talk a little bit about some issues pertaining to breathing that are important for everyone. At the risk of understating it, breathing is obviously vital to all of us and is something our bodies are doing continuously under normal circumstances to stay alive. We all probably know by now that it can be bad for our health to eat too much, even if it's really easy for us to do most of the time. You might not know, however, that it's also bad for our health to breathe too much. That's right, breathing too much is bad for us too, and it's also really easy to do, maybe even more so when we're wearing our masks. And that probably sounds weird, but hopefully we can clear things up at least a little bit in this video. And before we dive into some details, the simple summary of what I want to talk about is that mouth breathing generally is bad. Nose breathing for our purposes is good. Simple enough. We have all almost certainly experienced the feeling of needing to catch our breath after running or physically exerting ourselves in some other way. Sometimes the way we do this is to start breathing heavily or panting with our mouths open. We might also bend over and put our hands on our knees if we're really exhausted. Even minutes after we've stopped running, we're still likely to feel as though we haven't caught our breath yet if we're breathing this way. When we're hunched over and breathing through the mouth, most of what we're doing is using the muscles around the chest to circulate air rapidly in the upper part of the lungs. When this happens, we're breathing too much, to state it simply. A more effective way to catch our breath in this situation is to stand up straight, maybe hands on hips instead of knees, and inhale and exhale through the nose instead, even if it feels hard or counterintuitive at first, and it probably will. Our bodies have up to a 20% greater oxygen absorption when we breathe through the nose instead of the mouth. And this means we need less air to maintain saturation of oxygen in the blood. A component of our breathing that is important to understand is that most of the time the feeling we have of needing to catch our breath is controlled by the level of carbon dioxide in our blood, not the amount of oxygen we have available to us. A reason why we might start breathing hard in and out through the mouth to catch our breath is that our bodies can get rid of carbon dioxide quickly this way, but it's easy to decrease our carbon dioxide too much. What some people might not know is that we need to maintain a correct balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the blood. When we have a sufficient amount of carbon dioxide in the blood, it helps to dilate or open up blood vessels to allow oxygenated blood to get to the parts of the body where it's needed. Some of you might have had an experience when you were exercising for a period of time, and if you were breathing heavily through the mouth, your fingers or toes started to get cold, or maybe you got lightheaded. This is due to constriction or narrowing of the blood vessels, resulting from a drop in carbon dioxide. Blood is exposed to the small air sacs in our lungs for about 3/4 of a second, and we need to slow down our breathing rate enough that the necessary exchange of gases between the blood and air can occur. breathing through the nose naturally slows down our respiratory rate compared to mouth breathing, and it engages the diaphragm more than mouth breathing, which allows the air we breathe to reach the lower portions of the lungs where there is a higher concentration of blood. A good illustration I encountered recently compared breathing this way to rowing a boat, and that long, slow strokes are more effective to get the boat moving and keep it moving than short, fast strokes. And one of the worst things we can do when wearing our masks is to start breathing through our mouths if we feel like it's hard to breathe. But recent estimates suggest up to half of children breathe habitually through their mouths much of the time. Now, this is kind of a big deal because the way we breathe as children affects the structure of our faces for the rest of our lives, and there are other issues wrapped up in these facial changes as well. It's easy to observe by looking at human skulls that our facial structure as a species started to change between 400 and 500 years ago when we started having access to sugar and foods that are easier to chew. We obviously continue to have an abundance of soft processed foods available in the modern world, and our breathing has suffered for it. Changes in facial structure have become an inheritable trait during this recent change, historically speaking. When we look at older human skulls, we rarely see any that have crooked teeth, even though many of the practices we consider to be dental hygiene largely didn't exist back then. Typical development of people's faces and jaws was sufficient to accommodate all of their teeth, including wisdom teeth, without them competing for space. We also don't see crooked teeth or mouth breathing in other mammals. These days, many people have to have their wisdom teeth pulled because there isn't enough room in our mouths for them. More and more people are not even developing wisdom teeth anymore. Also, lots of people wear braces to straighten their teeth in ways that allow them to fit together into a smaller oral space. These changes in our faces due to diet have also decreased the size of our airway, which has increased the prevalence of mouth breathing, which in turn results in further changes in facial structure. Now, ideally, we should be breathing through our noses, with rare exceptions. And when we do this, the tongue should be at rest against the roof of the mouth, with the tip of the tongue just behind the upper incisors, or the front middle teeth. Now, take a second to stop and think about where your tongue is resting in your mouth. When this occurs, as it should throughout a person's developing years, the borders of the tongue apply pressure to the upper teeth and help ensure the palate, the hard palate at the top of the mouth, and upper jaw are as wide as they should be. I had a lot of difficulty breathing through my nose as a child, and this is probably a good time to mention that up to 3/4 of people are estimated to have a deviated septum. So there's no shortage of factors contributing to this problem. As a result of it being difficult to breathe through my nose, I did a lot of mouth breathing as a kid, and the resting posture of my tongue was in the lower jaw, which caused a narrowing of the hard palate and the space occupied by my upper teeth. And when the hard palate is narrower than it's supposed to be, it's often higher than it's supposed to be. So if it's supposed to be shaped like this and ends up narrower, the middle part is higher than it's supposed to be. It encroaches into the nasal cavity, making breathing through the nose even more difficult. Now, this is just another example of related problems snowballing into larger problems. I've seen lots of people for speech therapy over the years who have had issues stemming from a low forward resting posture of the tongue. 1/4 of Americans have sleep apnea, which is caused by the tongue falling back into the airway and interrupting breathing while sleeping. Now, if the resting positions of the tongue and jaw are where they should be, the tongue should remain adhered to the roof of the mouth, preventing it from falling into the airway. To close out the fire and brimstone portion of the lesson, mouth breathing results in frequent illness, gum disease, cavities, bad breath, dehydration, poor sleep quality, and weight gain from increased levels of cortisol. Think about how lousy you feel when your nose is stuffed up from allergies or a cold or whatever. Part of that crummy feeling comes from having to breathe through our mouth for an extended period of time. All right, enough of that. Let's talk some more about the benefits of breathing through the nose. Inhaling through the nose humidifies and warms the air we breathe before it gets to our lungs, and we talked about that at the beginning of this video. This is easiest to observe when we're outside on particularly cold winter days, which will be here before we know it. The tiny hairs in our noses act as little air filters, and they keep all sorts of nasty stuff out of our airways. It's a no-brainer why we would want to take advantage of this natural defense system during a pandemic. Nose hairs are beautiful. Love them. Blow your nose now and then to clear out the gunk they're collecting. Now, this was mentioned earlier too, but breathing through the nose naturally slows and deepens our breathing because our little nostrils are a lot smaller than our big mouths. And this natural restriction of airflow increases the transfer of oxygen, carbon dioxide, and waste products. This is especially true when we're inhaling and exhaling through the nose because of these sustained differences in air pressure inside and outside of the lungs. Breathing through the nose with the tongue in the correct resting position supports proper posture too. It's hard to breathe deeply into our bellies using the diaphragm when we're hunched over. Good to know when you're sitting at your desk. A study conducted at Stanford University in recent years shows there is a cluster of neurons in the brainstem which monitors our rate of breathing and connects it to our state of mind. A faster rate results in increased stress and agitation, while slower breathing results in a greater sense of calm. This is something humans have known about ourselves to some degree for a long time and is referred to as pranayama, forgive my pronunciation, in many types of yoga practices. Of great importance is that breathing through the nose increases our tolerance of carbon dioxide in the bloodstream, which contributes to increased blood flow throughout the body and a lowering of blood pressure. People with asthma and chronic anxiety typically have a lower tolerance for carbon dioxide in the blood than people without these conditions. Sometimes when a person with asthma feels a flare-up coming on, they might try to get ahead of it by increasing their rate of respiration through the mouth, which can actually make a flare-up more likely. Now, treating asthma is not my area of specialty, but if anybody who has asthma would like more information, I could point you in the direction of some people who are experts in teaching breathing techniques with a proven and long-standing record of decreasing instances of asthmatic attacks using specific breathing exercise protocols. Mentioned earlier about how mouth breathing can decrease our carbon dioxide levels too much. Well, habitually breathing through the mouth is basically a form of chronic mild hyperventilation. If you imagine what it looks like when someone is hyperventilating, they probably look frantic, panicked, and unable to control their breathing. An old school treatment for this is to breathe into a paper bag until the episode passes, and this works by allowing carbon dioxide levels to return to normal. Sometimes at home, when my kids start to get upset with each other, as siblings do, they begin to breathe rapidly through their mouths because this is part of our fight or flight response that increases our feelings of agitation. Now, if you were to ask my kids, they could tell you that I'm often instructing them to breathe through their noses when they start to argue because it's an effective way to calm them down and prevent conflicts from escalating. For those of you who have studied the human nervous system in school, broadly speaking, the nerves in the upper portions of the lungs engage the sympathetic nervous system, while the nerves in the lower lobes of the lungs engage the parasympathetic nervous system. Breathing deeply and slowly through the nose using the diaphragm can give us a sense of calm. It's sort of like the way you can make yourself feel better when you're sad by forcing yourself to smile. Our bodies are strange and interesting places. And one of the biggest benefits of breathing through the nose, particularly in the context of wearing masks in school, is that there is a molecule called nitric oxide that is released continuously in the nasal cavity, and we access it easily just by breathing through the nose. Now, nitric oxide performs loads of functions in the body, many of which are still being discovered and studied. For our purposes today, some of the effects of nitric oxide from nasal breathing are increased uptake of oxygen into the lungs, improved dilation of blood vessels, improved neurotransmission, so our nerve signals are more likely to start and end where they're supposed to, improved neuroplasticity, so in a school setting this might be kids' brains are more able to learn new information, improved sleep, improved attention. We all have moments when it's hard to pay attention, some more than others. Now, you might be struggling to stay engaged at this point in the video. Attention deficit characteristics commonly accompany chronic mouth breathing. Best of all, nitric oxide is antimicrobial, antiviral, and fortifies the body's immune system. There are clinical trials taking place right now studying nitric oxide as a potential treatment for people infected with COVID-19. And we're all making the stuff in our own noses right now. Take advantage of it. Also of note is the slower our breathing, the higher our concentration of nitric oxide. Fun fact is that humming greatly increases the release of nitric oxide in the nasal cavity by about 15 times, if I remember correctly. But that's probably not something we're going to be doing in class with any regularity. The overall health of a person's respiratory system has been highly correlated to a decrease in complications among people infected with COVID-19. Hopefully, by this point, you have monitored your own breathing and resting tongue position as I've been yapping away. Some of you might have thought, this has nothing to do with me. I always breathe through my nose. Good for you. That's great. Still, probably interesting, maybe, hopefully, if nothing else. For some of you, however, it might be a little uncomfortable to breathe through your nose. And will almost certainly be the case if it's not something you already do most of the time. Breathing effectively through the nose is kind of a use it or lose it ability. Researchers at Stanford studied patients who had laryngectomies, which is a removal of the voice box and involves a separation of the nose and the mouth from the airway, while a breathing opening is placed at the front of the neck. Now, these patients all exhibited complete closures of nasal pathways between 2 months and 2 years following surgery. The best way to breathe through the nose is just to keep doing it until it becomes automatic. It's hard to break old habits, but surprisingly easy to develop new ones. Teachers. Consistent nasal breathing is difficult for us to sustain during a normal day of work because we spend so much time talking to our students. Do you ever feel stressed out, frantic, or overwhelmed during the school day? It's a rhetorical question. Find ways to carve out times to breathe in for 6 seconds and out for 6 seconds through the nose. For those teaching younger students, maybe decrease it to 4 or 5 seconds in and out and try it with the whole class until everyone can do it. Some students might initially inhale or exhale quickly and hold their breath rather than actually slowing the rate at which they're breathing. Older students, use these strategies when you're feeling stressed or having trouble focusing, and give your teachers a break since they don't have a lot of opportunities to do the same. Maybe you should encourage them to take breathing breaks at the start of every class. They'd love that. I'm sure I've forgotten a few things, but I think that about covers it for today. Feel free to call or email me if you have any questions. Thank you for your time, and have a great year at Alfred-Almond Central School.